Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are currently in Genesis chapter 11, and this is going to be a very interesting chapter because this chapter puzzles people, perplexes people, because God tells Abraham to offer his son. Why did God do that? But we need to understand also that because of this, there are people who assume that the bad things that's going on in their life is a test by God. Wrong conclusion. Okay, so that's what I said, so let's get into it. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he answered. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to define the word test. Now, there are actually two words that people confuse. There is test, and then there is temptation or trials. Now, the word temptations we're not going to deal with because it basically simply means to entice. So in other words, God doesn't tempt us because he never entices us to sin. And James tells us that God doesn't tempt. We fall into temptation by our own sin, our own enticement, or allowing ourselves to be enticed. So God never, you cannot blame God because you fall into adultery or because you get drunk or whatever, steal, lie, whatever. That's your own enticement. But the word test here, the word test means to prove. And then one of the kind of best ways to understand this word prove, it would be like this chair I'm sitting on here. When manufacturers designed it, they had specifications for it. And so let's say, for example, they said, well, we designed this chair to swivel a certain way, and do this, that, and the other, and it can hold, let's say, 400 pounds. So they build it in the factory someplace, right? And then they test it. They take 400 pounds and they put it on the chair to see if the chair holds up to what their specifications call for. So in that sense, that's what the word test means. When God is saying here, and God tests Abraham, in other words, we could easily use the word prove. Now, a couple of other times we've seen where God does this in Scripture. In fact, more than a few times. But some of the more well-known would be like the book of Job, where God tests. Satan says he only serves you because you blessed him. So God proved that he didn't. The other time we see that the temptations or the testings of Jesus, they proved he was the Son of God. So this test here, God wasn't testing in the sense to say, oh, gee, I hope he makes it. It was to prove, and that's what the word test means. Okay. Let me say this. So the question oftentimes people will make and say that God, my tragedy, my sufferings, my trials, is God testing me. No, he's not. He's not testing you, okay? And people make that conclusion. Don't draw the conclusion when there's not one there. There can be a lot of reasons why we go through things. We go through things because, first and foremost, this is a sinful world. We go through things because of our own sin. We go through things for other people's sins. Okay, so we just So if you think about the victims of 9/11, those who were on the plane that crashed into the Twin Towers. Well, every one of those people got on the plane not knowing, the sin of some other people is why they died. Okay, so the question becomes, why did God allow it? Well, there's a whole lot of reasons why that could be. In other words, why did God allow those people to get on the plane? There's a lot of things by that. For example, this scar here. Oh, Oh, wrong one. This scar here that you see, I'm just recovering this. This happened back in July. I'm an avid bike rider, and I was riding my bike, and something happened to me. An impact. I don't even remember it. And that's kind of frustrating to me because I don't remember it. God was merciful. He pulled me through it, even to the point where there was a good Samaritan that saw me passed out on the side of a bike path and called 911. Okay, here's my thing. I could, say, well, why did God allow that to happen in the first place? I don't know. I don't even remember what happened, but what I do say is I thank God for how he rescued me. Okay? All right, so let's go on. Verse 2, he says, take your son, he said, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took with him 2 of his young men and his son Isaac. He split wood for a burnt offering and set out to go to the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then Abraham said to the young men, stay here with the donkeys. The boy and I will go over there to worship. Then we will come back to you. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. And in his hand he took the fire and the sacrificial knife. And the 2 of them walked together. Then Isaac spoke to his father, Abraham, and said, my father. Abraham replied, here I am, my son. Isaac said, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Now, right off the bat here, it is interesting to note that Isaac already was familiar with the burnt offerings, no doubt by his father. Enough so that he's saying, we're missing a major part of the sacrifice. Okay? So, verse 8, Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. The 2 of them walked on together, and when they arrived at the place that God had told him about, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. He bound his son Isaac and placed him on the altar on the top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. But an angel called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. Now, let me stop and make this point here that he had to bind Isaac. Okay? In other words, he just didn't say, hey, Isaac, climb up on the altar right there, right? So, reading between the lines here, certainly maybe Isaac wasn't all that willing to go. Now, let me just say, I'm ad-libbing here because we're not giving the details. Excuse me. Excuse me. Now, one other thing about this too is that he does answer Isaac and says the Lord will provide. No, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Okay, when he verse 8, he answered, God will provide the lamb for the offering, my son, which is kind of weird because, God is going to provide the lamb, and then he takes Isaac and binds him and throws him on the altars. And you're like, okay, what are you doing, Dad? Now, what is interesting about this story here, let me go back and read this here. Verse 10, then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called out from heaven. Now, here's what I wanted to bring out about this story here. We are told in the book of Hebrews that Abraham was more than willing and able, and at this point that he was going to not only kill Isaac, but provide him on the offering as a burnt offering. And the reason why that's important to note is that Abraham's faith here is what's so just astounding. Because in killing Isaac, he never wavered from the promise that God had made, meaning, in Isaac your seed will be. So he was willing to kill Isaac, and then he was going to stand back and says, you got to raise him from the dead. If he had killed him and burned him, you got to raise him from the dead. This is the promised seed. This is what you promised. Abraham's obedience was totally in the faith of God. That's what's astounding about his faith here. That, okay, God, I'm not understanding, but doesn't matter. If I kill him, you got to raise him from the dead. And just by way of note, we're going to see this throughout other instances where Israel would be facing deserved judgment. And the fact that they are the seed of Abraham is what will always save them from judgment. Okay? Always save them from judgment. Verse 11 again. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he replied, Here am I. Then he said, Do not lay a hand on the board and do not and the boy and do excuse me, let me say this, read it again. Do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son from me. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thickets of the horn. So God did provide, as Abraham told Isaac. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering to the place of his son. And Abraham named the place, The Lord Will Provide. So today it is said, it will be provided on the Lord's mountain. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, this is the Lord's declaration, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your only son. Verse 17, I will indeed bless you and make you an offering as numerous as the stars of the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your offering will possess the gates of their enemies, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed by your offspring, because you have obeyed my commands. And Abraham went back to the young men, and they got up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham settled in Beersheba. So the blessings are forever settled here, the covenant. It was always ever covered. As I said, the term test here simply means that Abraham was proven, his faith was proven by God. Not, and by the way, and Abraham had no doubt. We're told this in the book of Hebrews. If you read the book of Hebrews chapter 11, the writer tells us that Abraham had no problems with killing his son and providing the burnt offering because of the promise he had faith in. That he might have said, okay, I don't know what's going on here, God, but if I kill him and burn him, you have to raise him from the dead. That was his promise. And that's what he believed God for. That was his promise. All right, let's go on. And that's astounding. And by the way, this faith becomes the standard of faith for salvation, even for us. In the book of Galatians, he tells us that those who are of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. We are considered in the New Testament the children of Abraham through faith, our faith in Jesus Christ. So this is the beginning. This is the seed here that is sown for the very salvation we all partake of when we believe and have faith in Jesus Christ. Where is I at? All right, here we go. Verse 20. It says, now after these things, Abraham was told, Milcah also has borne 2 sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, his firstborn brother, Buzz, Uz and Buzz, so, and then Chemiel, the father of Aram, Chessi, Hazi, Pestash, Jadaph, and Bethu, and I know that I am butchering these names, so again, forgive me for that. Verse 23, and Bethu fathered Rebekah. Now, this is important because Rebekah, we're going to see later on, who will become Isaac's wife. Michael bore these 8 to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubines, whose name was Ream, also born Tebah, Kash, Tehash, and Makkah. So Rebekah is the one that we are most important here. So he mentions it here. We will see this later on in a couple of chapters. But again, it's very interesting, this offering or the testing up here. Let me be clear again. When we go through trials, I like to put it this way. There is the difference between the testings that we go through and the hardships of life. Okay? The hardships of life come as a result of sin, then our own sin, and it can be other people's sin, okay? Testings is us living our faith. Does God test in that respect or put us in situations for test? Sure. But understand that because you get sick or because you lost your job or because of this, that's not how God tests. And that's my point here. There are a lot of people that think that every bad thing that happens is God doing it. In fact, he gets blamed usually the first. And like, no. Bad people. Sin. Those are the things that produce the hardships of life. We see this even in our walk of faith, that the sufferings of our faith are a direct result of our faith in Jesus Christ. Hardships is, again, the whole different category. So in a sense, the testing we see here with Abraham, in a sense, it's the same or a carry on to when we talk about the sufferings of our faith. The difference is that a person, you may suffer for your faith because Satan, through individuals, they're trying to destroy your faith. They're trying to destroy your testimonies. That's the most common use of the word suffer or sufferings. And the reason why the word suffering is used is because the word suffering itself means to allow. In other words, you don't retaliate. When you could retaliate, you don't because you're a witness. So we are here to be lights of the world. So we allow a lot in order for that light to be shown. All right, guys. Chapter 23 in our next study. I will see you then.